Hey, Christine, welcome to Keep What You Earn.
Oh, thank you so much for having me as a guest.
Thank you for coming on, and I'm so excited for this conversation. Now, would you mind just introducing yourself real quick to those listening?
Absolutely. In short, I am your expert in a happier ending if you are a business owner. And ultimately, what I've been doing for the last, oh God, nearly 30 years now is helping business owners get out of the day to day, hand over control in a way that is comfortable for them so that they can sit firmly in the control seat when they come to transition out of their business, whether it's selling it, whether it's handing it on to the next generation. But ultimately, it means that they're keeping the value of their business higher than it would otherwise be, and therefore keeping more, ultimately, keeping more of what they've earned.
Exactly. So you're in the right place to talk about this. But you mentioned like handing over control and keeping a control seat. Can you unpack that for us a little bit on what you mean by when you're handing over control? Because I think that scares a lot of business owners that are like me, who are kind of, we like being in control, which is kind of why we started our business in the first place. We really wanted to have control of our life. And now we have to hand that over, possibly.
Yeah. So control uh, it's a social construct.
Hmm.
When you start your business, you think, I'm leaving the corporate rat race behind, and I am going to now have the freedom
Hmm.
and control over my money, my finances. It might be a bit tricky at first, but ultimately I'm driving for financial freedom, for time freedom, and for location freedom. And typically you get started and your first job is getting your first customer, and your second job is getting the first customer to pay. And that starts the cycle of being absolutely in the weeds, and you think you're in control. But this master servant relationship is completely upside down. You're now a slave to your business instead of the master of your business. So
Hmm.
when it comes to control, there are a couple of issues. One is around the actual control versus the perceived control. And then and most of the issues are up here in between your ears because of this perception that the more I work in my business, the more it is worth, when actually, again, the complete opposite is true. The more you are in your business, the more your business relies on you or needs you, the less your business is worth. And the control issue is actually recognizing that you currently think you are in control, but actually the business is controlling you. Once we
Mm.
get that sorted from a mindset perspective, and you can kind of let go a bit of that thought pattern, we now start to really dig into what is controlling your business, and how do you start letting go of the little things on your desk which release you to actually go and spend some time with the people that you love, doing the things you enjoy, but also actually doing the things that are really important, not so much the stuff that is urgent.
Yeah. And if you want to do more in your business, you're doing it by choice and not by necessity. And that's
Absolutely.
a big part of it too, is that you can come back and work on things and help out, and no one would be, you know, argumentative if you decided to come back and help out a little bit more. But the fact that you don't have to,
Mm.
it's not a chained relationship. I would say I use this metaphor that when you're self-employed, you simply pick your cage. That's it.
Yes. Yeah,
It's like
that's,
instead of
I
being
really
in
love that.
someone else's cage, you have simply
Yeah.
walked out of someone else's cage and said, "I'll take that one. At least I've chosen it." And
Yes.
and we have this false perception that we've chosen it and therefore we have control over that decision. But it's like there are still four walls around you and you still can't really leave.
Yeah. Yeah. Most business owners. So if you're a business owner in an owner managed business, then you have a job. You might not think you have a job, but you have a job.
Mhm.
You probably have the worst job in the world because it's everything that you need to do plus everything else that's left over, or everything you feel obliged to do. So you're now stuck with the worst job in the world that's got long hours, or way longer hours than you ever anticipated, you're not really in charge of anything because everything trickles down to you. And there's a whole saying which I'm trying to think of a polite way of putting it, but basically the doo-doo should always roll downhill.
Oh, you can say shit on this show, don't worry.
It's like shit
Yes.
does not roll uphill.
No.
And so therefore,
that's a common
if it's
phrase.
rolling towards you, you're at the bottom of the hill. And I'm pretty sure you think you're at the top of it. And then I learned this from a very wise man about 10 years ago. I learned the 4 words that are most important to a business owner to remind yourself every day. Your life, you choose. Everything in your diary, everything on your plate is what you've chosen. So, and I love the cage analogy because it really, really works.
You've simply chosen the cage that you remain in. And it's because there's this false perception that because we are free from working for someone else, which frankly, I've been through this. I've been self-employed. I am self-employed. I consider myself, I'm shifting more away from considering myself a fractional CFO to considering myself the CEO of a fractional CFO practice. Very different.
Yes.
So I went from employee to I run my own practice to fractional CFO to now I feel like I'm running a fractional CFO practice. But I feel like I'm no longer in the technician role. I'm kind of escalating into manager and into owner. But I think everyone has to go through that technician phase when you're first starting out. Everyone is wearing all the hats and doing all the things. And I think the sooner you can get to that place where you realize, that you are in that position. I think the whole thing is self-awareness first. Where are you going? Are you at least moving toward that goal and making it easier to reach that point where you can behave like an owner? Because I don't want to shame anyone into like, well, I'm doing all the things in my business because I'm making $100,000 and like that's what you do because I can't afford to hire anyone. Absolutely. You are going to do that for a period of time. I think it's kind of a rite of passage. But but you also have to be thinking about, but when I make this decision, when I do hire that first person or when I create a process, I'm actually envisioning what will that turn into and what am I moving toward? What is the company 3, 5, 10 years from now going to look like? And what little bricks can I lay now to make sure that foundation is strong?
And the main challenge for most business owners is they're thinking those kind of things, but they're not actually documenting it. And therefore, then they're not sharing it with anybody who can help them. Mm-hmm. And even if I am not advocating that you suddenly lay bare all your financials to everybody who works for you, for example, although frankly, every time I've done it, it's worked. But okay, I mean, let's start with something small, but literally just think about where you want to be. So if you thought about, I want to sell my business in 5, 10 years, or I want to retire in 10 years, then what kind of business do you want to be selling? And actually start documenting that this is what I want. I talk about having a moment of absolute selfishness because quite often business owners, they get into the weeds of it. They're not recognizing they've got a job, and then they start worrying about they can't take time off, etc. Or if they do, their phone is literally velcroed to the palm of their hand, worse than a teenager. And and of course that's all that's doing is creating more stress. And so just take half a day out and think in a moment of complete selfishness. If you didn't have to look after anybody else, what is it that you would want your business to do for you? And write it down. Because the minute you write it down, you can actually challenge yourself on it. It's like, is that really what I want? Because quite often the first draft will be what you think other people think that you should want. And because it doesn't have to, you don't have to be somebody off Shark Tank that gets £1 million or £10 million investment. We don't have to be the next Uber or PayPal or Elon Musk. Whatever your success factors are. And like you say, I love that I'm not going to shame anybody, because actually everybody has their own internal success criteria when they really think about it. But to be honest, most people are so busy comparing themselves to other ideas of success. And of course, what that does is that's really scary to start planning out. So they put that to one side. They think it's going to be difficult. And then they get back in the weeds, because actually being in the weeds, being the technician, that's really comfortable.
Yeah.
But it doesn't add value.
It doesn't, but I think there's some degree of it bringing joy as well, because typically people will start businesses as technicians who just want to do that technician work, and they want to do it on their own terms to some extent. So like for me, working with clients I choose instead of those that were handed to me, working with an industry that I choose, that to me is an element of freedom of choice in a dimension of what I do in terms of who I work with, how I do it, and what tools I use and when I work, is enough of an intro to freedom, because we haven't even experienced that as typical W-2 workers pre-COVID. We've literally been in a cubicle cage doing what other people tell us to do and owning our calendars. Simply being able to wipe off my calendar and say, I take meetings from 10 to 2. I felt like I ripped off the handcuffs and I was like running around out of prison. I felt like the day I got released from prison when I got my calendar the first day after I quit my job. And I think there's something to be said that there's these levels in a sense, because we're talking about freedom, complete freedom. And I go, that feels like freedom. There are things that feel like freedom when you're self-employed, but there's still always going to be, but you are still answering to something. There's still something that's going to be on your ankle holding you back. There's going to be an e-brake that someone can pull on you. And that's what we're talking about is really being able to do things completely by choice. You may want to, I mean, personally, I love what I do. I love being a fractional CFO and I love working with clients. I don't see myself not working with clients. But I need to build a business where I don't have to work with clients. I need to build a business where everyone else can take ownership of that if we design it that way. And then I have the pure choice to remain as a participant or to replace myself. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to do that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be in the business. The key item is choice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And being very clear about the job that you do. Because if you are clear about the role, and most business owners do about 15 different roles, but if you're very clear about the roles that you do, you can actually start doing the things that you really like. Recognize the things that literally you put off until the end of the day or the weekend, which I call business owner weekend admin. And you're generally doing it at weekend, not because you don't have time to do it in the week, but because you keep putting it off. Well, all those things are a big alarm bell to say, get someone else to do this, because this is creating or removing any joy that you might have. But let's get back to the job situation. If you define the role and you accept that you are in that role, the role is defined and you're doing it by choice, which means that anytime you choose not to, you can recruit the replacement. And everybody knows what that role is because it's now transparent. The big challenge in most businesses that are owner managed is the business owner is doing the 15 things and nobody has any visibility of it. So everybody else is guessing. And that it leads to inconsistency. It leads to lack of certainty. It leads to reduced confidence in your staff. And of course, that's a downward spiral. In the military, they have the 3 C's, because the famous saying about no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. And that's a big excuse for a lot of people going, oh, as soon as you plan something, things change. So why would I plan? Okay. And we both know that it's about long-term direction. Or that, as Mike Tyson said, everybody's okay until they get a punch in the face. And that is life like a business owner. And I've completely lost my train of thought now. I was going somewhere.
No, that's wonderful. I actually think you're right with the Mike Tyson reference. That is a much better analogy of how we actually feel. And it's true. It's more about if you're programming can you imagine if someone said, there's no point in using GPS because the roads are going to get blocked? And I go, yes, but if you always have a destination programmed, it will reroute you. You will be able to be nimble, and you will know what direction, compass you are moving in to be able to reach your destination. You will have resources available to reroute and to be able to change course.
Yes.
And to eventually reach that destination. But if you say it's just not even worth setting a destination because I'm going to hit all these detours along the way, yeah, you're going to allow for extra time. Is all I would say. Allow for a little extra time. But yeah, we were talking about I think that when you define the job that you fulfill, you can much easier bring somebody else in to replace you. But we started this conversation on the subject of control because I know that is hard for people to relinquish. It's hard for people to give up control because to some extent we still have this kind of scarcity mindset of it's what I know, and if I'm replaceable, then I'm not special anymore. And if I'm replaceable, they don't need me. And we don't take that as a compliment all the time.
No. I like my best client ever in terms of the one that I most enjoyed and got the best results with. When he contacted me the first time, I've got a little quiz that I advertise, and he'd done the quiz. And then he'd got my phone number. It was in the early days when my mobile number was everywhere. It's nowhere now. And he just phoned me up, and like, I didn't even get to say my name. It's just this voice over the end of the phone said, "You got to get me out of here." You know, he said, "I'm becoming the biggest problem in my business." And I said, "Well, just by the way, I'm Christine. Why don't you just tell me about that?" And he said, "Well, I'm really worried." He said, "My business, I know it's a really good business and it's earning me a really good living. And I know I need to get out of the way, and I've got a fantastic team, but I can't seem to stop interfering." And he said, "And it's really creating this anxiety." And I said, "Well, what are you afraid of?" And he said, "Well, I'm actually really afraid if they succeed." And I was stunned by this. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, if I went from, I started this business 26 years ago and I got to here," he said, "and if they double that, which is what they keep telling me they're going to do in the next 2 years, so they double what it took me 26 years to do, I said, what does that say about me?" And I said, "Have you just thought that they're starting from a very different place? They didn't build this from scratch. And what that says to me about you is that you've recruited really good people and supported their development so that they can actually do that." He thought about that for a minute, and he said, "Well, I'm still afraid." And I said, "What are you afraid of now?" And he said, "What if they fail? My entire life's work is in this business." And I said, "And how likely is that, given that they're talking about doubling your revenue next year?" And when he finally got his head round it, and we gave him the tools for control, because this was all about control and it was mostly perception. When we actually gave him the tools to do it, within 8 months, he had an MD that was actively leading his business. He'd titled himself as chairman, which meant that he had a mentoring role for the MD, which changed their relationship to so much more positive. And they doubled their revenue. And they added £1 million to the value of the business within 8 months. And it's like, I speak to him fairly regularly. And he said, I can't thank you enough. He said, because I'd been struggling with that thought process about the control in my business for, a decade.
Yeah, and it's so important to distinguish between the control, like having control be a good thing. And you want to have control to the extent of control over policy, control over the culture, tone setting, and things like that. But you have to zoom out. You have to be able to actually, and trust other people with that control. Because if you've communicated your vision well enough, they can see themselves in it, and then they can also execute it. But I think that there's a lot of stuff going. I always say that running a business is the best personal development exercise you can do to reveal all of the issues you probably have. And we are all quote unquote guilty of these things. Like, this is just human nature and human behavior, but it's so important. And I think that for those listening who maybe are saying, okay, I can appreciate this. I understand that I need to bring in other people. I understand that I need to essentially replace my role in the business, but I don't necessarily want to sell my business.
Yep.
This is another thing too, where sometimes it's kind of how we think about, folks in their 20s, 30s are told save for retirement and told when retirement happens, XYZ will happen,
Yeah.
Social Security for us Americans, right? It's things like that. And we go, okay, that is so far distant in the future. I'm not worried about it because it's not even in my purview. It's the reason why I never wore sunscreen as a teenager. It's like it's the same thing. You hear it. This is good for you. You should be thinking about this. And you're like, yeah, but I have plenty of time. What is your answer to those early stage entrepreneurs who are saying, yeah, but I don't know how to apply that right now. I can't hire a whole team right now. I don't have an exit plan in place, and I don't want to sell my business anytime soon. What should I be doing right now?
Okay. If you've already got a business that's going, and it doesn't matter where it is, it will have some value to it. Mm-hmm. So what we really need to do as a business owner is to be protecting that value as we build it. And so the one thing I would always say to them is do all of the actions required to protect your business value. And if you're in your business, this is going to start with you. At the end of the day, you need a personal disaster recovery plan that is aligned with your business disaster recovery plan. And this is not difficult at all. So just because it's a few fancy words, please don't think that this is something that's really difficult, because in more than 50% of the cases, a business owner will leave their business or be unable to work in their business because of, I always say, the 4Ds: death, disease, disability, divorce. Mm-hmm. And these are things that come and swipe you off at the knees when you least expect them. So plan for them, because what this will do is it will actually not only protect but increase the value of your business. It'll make your business more resilient, because if you were unable to work in most owner-managed businesses, any owner that is unable to work in their business for whatever reason, their business is likely to be insolvent within 12 months, and actually more likely 6 months. So how long would your business survive if you weren't able to work for a month, 3 months, 12 months? So now start thinking about what activities would somebody else, if you're not able to work, have to put in place to make sure that your business keeps going. Now there you've got a disaster recovery plan, a succession plan, and the first part of your exit plan all done in one go. And it really isn't hard work. What it is hard thinking, because no one wants to think that they are going to die or become disabled or suffer from a life-changing disease. Nobody wants to go there. And that is one of the main barriers. Is why doesn't everybody have a will? It makes absolute common sense to have one. And yet I think it's only about 20% of the population in the UK have actually got a will. It's like, wow. If you die without a will, the money all goes to the government. Get a will. So, but equally, if you die, your business is going to be gone within 12 months. In most cases, and over 90% of the cases. So if you just did one thing for yourself, for your family, for your employees, for your customers, and for your suppliers, do this one thing, which is have your personal disaster recovery plan. And it really only has to have 3 things. What do you do, and how can someone immediately replace you, either within or from externally, from the business, somebody who can actually keep your business running. The second thing is actually having delegated responsibility already, not whether you're there or not. Have some delegated responsibility to your team so that in the most basic terms they can keep it going. And the third thing is actually having your vision of where you want to take the business, because the minute that's documented and it's visible to everybody, then while you're being replaced, people can actually still keep going in that vague direction, even if it might be a slower pace or in a slightly diminished way. And again, that plan doesn't need to be complicated. We can stick it on one side of A4 paper in Doodle if needed to be.
Perfect. And, we talked a lot about value and protecting the value. And I heard this analogy. This was shared with us. I went to a workshop with Alex and Layla Hormozi, who Alex was the author of $100 Million Offers, $100 Million Leads. They run acquisition.com. And they're kind of making it sexy again to talk about like exit planning and talk about selling your business. And we were in their workshop, and they used this analogy that I thought made perfect sense about value of a business and about, selling versus scaling. Because I had just asked about, the entrepreneur who maybe doesn't want to sell tomorrow, why should I be building a sellable business? Or why do I need to be thinking about this? And they use this analogy of, have you ever sold your house before? I say, yeah. What did you do before you sold the house? You probably had the house cleaner come in and do a deep clean. You staged all of your furniture to look nice. You minimized things. You redid the bathroom. You did all the things you've been meaning to do for like 3 years. You finally cleaned up the stuff. And then you go, it's a nice house. Actually, you made it desirable to live in.
Yeah.
And then you rethink, I like it here. So I find that businesses are similar. And they kind of called attention to that and said, if you want to sell or you want to grow and scale, are the things you're doing any different?
Yes. Yeah. Quite often I have to advise my clients that actually to make their business really sellable, they probably need to go and acquire another business. Because currently, so people buy businesses for 3 reasons. They buy access to customers, access to capacity, access to capability. And quite often, if your business is so reliant on you, and the difference between where you are and the rest of your team leaves this massive middle management gap, then the best thing that you can do is just go and acquire another business that's already got that middle management gap, that's culturally aligned, that you can. And I'm not talking about smashing them together, but actually build an integration so that they're actually greater than the sum of their parts. Going through the acquisition process is the other side of the sale process coin. And when you go through the acquisition process, it gives you really good insight into the 10 levels of hell that you are going to go through when you sell your own business. Because I can't make I'd love to dress this up as, oh yeah, it's easy. Let me show you how easy it is. No, it's not. It's work. And it's really hard work, because somebody from the outside is going to come and tell you that you've got a really ugly baby. And then they're going to say it's worth so much on day 1. And by day 90, they're going, boy, this baby's not only ugly, it's never going to get pretty. I think we'll just drop the price by 25%. And every question is going to feel like a personal affront to everything you've done. And it's, by the time you get really tired, you're taking things really personally. So be prepared, and it won't be so stressful, and you won't be so tired, and you will be, you'll have put on that suit of armor or developed the thick skin, the thickness of a rhinoceros, and you won't be taking things personally, because you'll be in the mindset that this is a business. It's not my baby. And in a short period of time, all things being well, it's going to be someone else's business. It doesn't belong to me anymore. Quite a lot like moving house, actually. I know some people who, they do the leaving the house, and it's, lots of tears and everything. And I personally have never been attached to premises, because I've moved so often, and I can't really understand it, but I can see how people can get attached to somewhere. But I get attached
more
to the
memories that are associated with it, because they start attaching other emotions to the physical thing, which, just like a business, they remember the memories and like the sweat equity they put in, and they see an intangible value in the 4 walls of what it is that others don't see. And that's why it's
Yes.
hard to grapple with. And when it comes to looking at, say, a home, right? Like I said, you're dressing it up nice and then it's ready to sell. And then you actually kind of fall in love with it even more and say, well, a home worth selling is worth living in. A business worth
Yes.
selling is worth scaling.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I do with my clients to bring them back to reality, because sometimes, and I don't know where these two numbers come from, because it used to be, you know, I just want £1 million, but it's definitely changed. Like inflation's got in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So whenever I talk to clients about, well, what do you think your business is worth? They come up with one of two figures. It's either 5 million or it's 30 million, regardless of what the reality is. And usually you can knock a zero off. And so I become initially the bearer of bad news, and they start to see me a bit as the grim reaper, because it's like, oh God, I've now got a business that's worth a whole lot less. I'm either going to be working a lot longer, or I'm going to be retiring a lot poorer. But so I always get my clients to say, like, in the condition that it's in, would you actually buy this business? And then get them to really think about whether they would buy it, because they have to get emotionally detached from the sweat, stress, and sacrifice, because that means nothing to a buyer. A buyer is coming without emotional attachment. Their only thing. So you're thinking about stress, sweat, and sacrifice. And a buyer is thinking ROI, baby. That's all I'm interested in. And it's usually driven by two things: positive cash flow and profitability.
Exactly. And the systems in place to keep it consistent.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing, is they're buying a machine.
Yes.
You know, it's kind of like when you're buying a car, and when you're buying a car that someone else owned before, a pre-owned vehicle, right? You don't care about the stories of where it's been or what it's done. It's like, will it run? Will it get me from point A to point B? It's a very logical decision for a buyer, for the most part, in those transactions. And then for the seller, I feel like there's a lot of emotion that gets wound up in it.
When I was in the Middle East, I had to sell my car. And I didn't have a special car. It was a little Toyota RAV4, four-wheel drive. It was brilliant in the desert. I loved it.
Yeah, we have one here, actually.
They're fabulous, fabulous cars. And when I sold it, I had lots of people interested. And do you know, I sold it for less than the highest bid, because despite my protestations of I don't get emotionally attached to things, the couple who came and said that they would look after it better. Like, I didn't ask them. They just started talking about the things that they would do with this car and how they would look after it. And honestly, it was like fostering your child out to, giving your child to care. You're only going to give it to the person who's going to give it the most care. And I actually sold my car for a lot less, because these people really wanted the car to look after. And it is a moment of, in some ways, it's a moment of joy, but it's also a moment of shame.
A moment of weakness, if you will, on the emotional side, to say, I think there's an acknowledgement there that we are humans that have attachments to, we assign emotions to things that others won't, or other species and beings won't, right? So we have this complex emotional field of, this object has meaning to us, and we want it to be taken care of as though it is a being itself, and we value it. And our businesses are no different. Our businesses are probably more even like that. Like I'm going through this with my husband. My husband recently exited his business, and he's watching from the sidelines, watching the business and what they're doing. And that is really hard to do when you go, there's somebody else making decisions about, like, they changed the vehicle wraps. And he's like, why would they change that? It was so good. And he sees the cars out now, and I'm like, you have to throw your hands up and say, not my problem. It's not my issue anymore. I've sold the control of it and everything. It's hard though, because for him, it was 17 years of his life poured into that. There were fingerprints in a way on those old vehicle wraps. There was an element of Jason threaded through all of these little decisions, micro decisions that he made in his business, micro decisions that we've made in our businesses on why we do things, all the way down to the logo color and the little things that were just like your choice. And it's almost like people are stripping away those feelings of freedom that you had and those things of pride that you had. Like, I did that. Like throwing away your kindergarten macaroni painting. It's like, but I made that. And it's like, but it doesn't serve anyone anymore. And that is hard. So I think that there's an acknowledgement that is going to be hard, let alone the legal and financial process of selling a business. There is also an emotional toll that it will take on you while you're going through it. That just makes those other things even harder to grapple with because you're not always thinking logically, and it will make the process drag on a little bit longer or make it a little bit harder for you.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why preparation is key, because of all the businesses that actually go to market, 80% of them don't get sold. And it's a statistic that seems to stack up no matter which country you're in. And then when you start off with, of all owner managed businesses, about 90% of them are unsaleable. And certainly if they are sold, they are sold at a significantly lower value than they would be if they weren't so owner reliant. And part of it is the lack of logical preparation, which makes it more stressful, more time consuming, takes more money. And then that creates an anxiety as well as a fatigue that then makes you start to react more emotionally. So earlier I said during the sale process, they're going to ask you question after question, and it's just going to come at you like machine gun fire, especially if the process isn't controlled very well. And when you're under that bombardment, it's difficult not to take it personally. And it's even more difficult if you're tired and you're well into the process and you're fatigued. So if I told you that all of that is going to be made easier for you at that end, which unfortunately is going to be for some people too far in the distance for them to really kind of think about, but all of that is going to be made so much easier if you start doing your exit and succession planning today. And here's the really good news. You can do it in 15 to 30 minutes a day. That's it. That's all it takes, 15 to 30 minutes a day. And eventually you'll actually free up some time where you'll actually want to spend more than 30 minutes a day doing it, but you can get started on as little as 15 minutes a day. Mm. And that, when I start saying that to clients, because it is work, but if you know that your first little steps are literally like little tiny baby steps, before you, and it may be a short while before you start seeing a change, but then when you do, it's easier to change your mindset as a result of it.
Yeah, it's just like saving for retirement. I used that comparison before, where even if you save a little earlier, time is your friend because it will compound. So even if you're doing a little bit sooner and you make it a habit, that will compound and be more valuable later than if you started later. It's a little bit harder to get started. And time is always your friend on the compounding. And I think the compounding does happen the sooner you start with these plans, because that one SOP or one procedure will lead to the next, or will be the catalyst to hiring the person who documents the next one, and so on and so forth, and improving it. And we actually have, we've been through an SOP exercise to basically take me out of any reliance on anything in the business. And it's been a fun exercise. I actually took 2 weeks off for the first time in May with no actual work. Yeah, I know. That was my test, though. I said, I'm going to take 2 weeks off. And if shit burns to the ground, we got work to do. Yeah. And the whole team was like on board with like, we're going to have like a no Shannon 2 weeks and see how this goes. Minus the occasional updates or whatever that were not urgent, but solicited by me, like, how are things going? How are you feeling? Personal check-ins. Nothing really happened, and everything was fine, and everything got done. And I was like, okay, I feel better now. But we have an SOP initiative that goes on where every week, did everyone spend an hour writing down something that they did or an improvement? It's just like an hour a week type of thing. I personally do it every time I'm on a plane.
Yeah.
because it doesn't require the internet or if the
Yes.
internet's not working. So every
Yeah.
time I have a trigger, an environmental trigger, where if I am on a plane, I go, let me pick one of my processes and I'm going to go dump out the narrative of the design of the process. And then I'm going to go meet with the people who own the process and say, is what's in my brain what's actually happening? Let's reconcile and let's document what's really happening. And then I assign out, make a video of each of these hows behind the narrative of the why and the what we do. And then that really unpacks a lot of it. It's not that hard to do. I think people get overwhelmed. I have to make a whole encyclopedia of everything. And I go, start with one process, like onboarding or like your sales call process or like, one element of what you do in your recipe every month for a client or every quarter for a client. And that will start the juices flowing and you'll start going, oh, this is actually not that hard to document because it's all up here. We just have to get it out.
Yeah. And that serves two purposes. So you get the joy of 1% improvements and everything, because typically what I get my clients to do is you don't need to invent a process. You just tell me what you're doing every day. So, and then we can actually join that all up and I have a little document that allows them to put it in play. Then to make sure that you've documented the process that you probably do by second nature, we're going to give it to someone who doesn't do that job. And we're going to get them to test it, because then that'll identify the gaps in it. Because usually 3 steps in, they'll go, what leap do I do now? Because it's like it's gone from here to here, and there's a bit in the middle that's missing. So you get the initial improvement. But here's the second thing. If you are employing people on values and you have processes, then you can have what will probably really difficult conversations much more easily. Because when something goes wrong, we're not pointing the finger at anybody. It's, okay, something went wrong. Here's the process. Where in the process did it go wrong? And you can clearly identify either the process needs improving so that it'll never happen again. And if it isn't anything in the process, then it's somebody didn't follow the process. Okay, so now we're having a conversation with the somebody who didn't follow the process. And this conversation can only go 2 ways. It's like, oh, I didn't know there was a process, which is a management issue, because now there needs to be an education of there is a process and this is what you do. Or, and this is usually with people who've been around a while, they'll say, processes, they're for everybody else, not for me. And that results in a conversation of, well, you probably need to go and work somewhere else, because around here, everybody follows the process. And then I hear people saying, oh, process restricts creativity. And I'm like, tosh. I don't know what the American version of that word is. But it's absolute rubbish. It doesn't stifle creativity at all. It actually releases creativity. And the example I can give is 2 people, Steve Jobs, Barack Obama. You only ever saw them wearing the same thing all the time, because they literally opened the wardrobe and got out the hanger for that day, which had exactly the same thing as the hanger for the next day and the next day and the next day. They didn't have to think about this, and processes keep you on track for consistency. So they don't take up huge amounts of brain space because you're not trying to remember, which means that you've now got more free brain space to go and do higher level work. Be creative if that's what part of your job is, but all the stuff that needs to be done consistently so that the person before you and after you can rely on you doing your job properly, well, that should take up like no bandwidth whatsoever, because there's a process there. You don't need to think about it.
Agreed. And to your point about, it stifles creativity to have the process. I go, imagine a restaurant without a menu or recipes. Chaos.
Yes.
Chaos.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They don't know what ingredients to order. They don't know how many chefs they need for what period of time. They don't know what they're cooking. And you're going to wait 2 hours for your food because they got to make it up as they go, right? That is what we're talking about, is just, if you were running a restaurant, it's like, have a menu and have recipes to give your chefs so they know what the hell to serve. And I've always used that analogy with my team and say, we're just creating the recipes. so that way
Yeah.
the chefs know what to cook and it's muscle memory, and you don't
Yeah.
have to stress out about it every time something comes in or a request comes in. And I wanna just emphasize that what we're not saying, and I'm speaking for Christine, but you can tell me if you agree. What we're not saying is that everything must be so standardized that
Yeah.
you leave no margin for the unexpected or no margin for exceptions or customizations or other things. Your business can allow for that. And we've really learned this year. We try to over standardize everything in the effort to engineer a process. But what we
Yeah.
realized was, as opposed to articulating a very specific and granular process, what was more valuable to my team were guiding principles.
Oh, yes.
Guiding
Yes.
principles as
Yeah.
opposed to articulating. So I'll give you an example of this. I've shared this on a recent episode too, but we said, okay, Shannon, when we get this type of requesting, because they wanted to alleviate me getting so many emails or me answering so many emails manually. And I said, when you guys get this type of email and it's like, Shannon, give me your response. And I said, you know what though? It doesn't sound like you. It sounds like it sounds like a weird cross version of me. And it wouldn't
Yeah.
make sense for you to say this. So instead, what if we just said the email must convey 1, gratitude for the message, 2, provide a solution, 3, ask if this is sufficient, like something like that, where I said
Yeah.
here are the core elements that must be in the email in a way that you would say it. Because I
Yeah.
don't care if you use my vocabulary. I don't care. It's not coming from me. But I
Yeah.
said guiding principles follow these sort of high level rules of how to approach these problems. That is more valuable in my company right now than the explicit guidance, because you will get overwhelmed if everyone is looking to you for the literal things to say on every little problem, as opposed to equipping them with the toolbox they need to figure out what the
Yes.
solution is using guiding principles. I'll say, what are the guiding principles? And they'll say this, and this. And correct. So do
Yeah.
what you think is necessary to solve that.
I'll totally go back to I remembered the point that I was trying to make with Mike Tyson. So the 3 C's in the military: consistency, certainty, and clarity. And
Yes.
once you've got those 3 kind of guidelines resolved and everybody understands the guidelines and they're not just a bunch of words that, like, nothing drives me more mental than going into a client's office and seeing like 5 words as our values. And
Yes.
no, they are not your
Integrity.
values. That's just a bunch of words out of the dictionary. What does it mean in behaviors? And so when it comes to processes, there's a really good book called The Checklist Manifesto. And it's a really good book to read. I recommend it to a lot of people who go, oh, we're just kind of trying to shoehorn people all into one little box. Well, when you've got something that you can't physically describe every time, you can't be prescriptive, then just have a checklist. And that actually those guiding values then come into the checklist, because
Right.
you couldn't prescribe the process for heart surgery, but you can do a checklist to make sure that things go right. The preparation, the op stage, the during op stage, the when the patient starts to bleed out stage, and they're closing them up and making sure there's nothing inside them stage. So and that's actually where the checklist manifesto comes from. The guy who wrote it is a doctor, and I have to say, when I started using and I used to run medical facilities myself, when we started using that as a principle, it completely changed the attitude of the staff. It changed the cooperation and collaboration within the staff. But actually, it was really easy for our clients, patients, to see what those principles were, which included acceptable ways for them to behave. And everything just lifted. So so combining sometimes prescription, but where you can't be prescriptive, have the guiding principles is a fabulous idea, and your business will really thrive because of it. Well, you're probably seeing that already.
Yeah, we are seeing that, because it's almost like autonomy with boundaries.
Yes.
It's autonomy. It's just the lines to color in, but you choose the color, whatever analogy you want to use for this. I've just given you the lines. You can do whatever you want with the picture. I'm not gonna.
Yes.
It's not paint by numbers where I tell you the number and tell you the color. That's not fun. That's not
Yes.
as fun
Yeah.
as a coloring book where I just give you the lines and go, have at it, do whatever you want. Just stay in the lines of the guiding principles. And that is more fun because people just want the choice of what color to use. They just want the choice of, I want to do it my way, but my way within the bounds of our culture and our rules. And that's totally fine. I think there's a balance of that. And the problem we had was we kept going on the polarity of the other sides of
Yeah.
we must architect every little what if scenario and every process and document it. And it's like, no, you have people you can trust. If you hire people
Yeah.
that are professionals and that have enough judgment and enough experience, they can exercise judgment within the boundaries of those lines that you draw.
Yeah.
As long as you give them the tools they need to do that.
Absolutely. And flip it over to the other side, when you bring new people in, especially if you get your succession plan really well defined and well executed, you're only ever going to bring people in at the bottom. And then if you've got all the other things sorted, you know, your standard operating procedures, your guiding principles, the culture and what is acceptable around here, and that's how you lead, then your junior people come in and they learn that right from the very beginning. So actually you start trusting them straight away. You give them some guidance around what's the acceptable thing around here, and then you train them in all your operating procedures. But and it comes back to that word control. So
Yep.
you're not losing control. You're not giving away control. You're empowering your people to have control in accordance with the culture alignment, the vision that you've documented and shown them. Like, this is the way that we're going. We're going to go through this massive jungle and there's no path. And I'm going to lead you there. But this is where we're going.
Yeah.
So even if we get a bit lost along the way, you know, everybody knows the basic direction that they're going.
Yeah. We all have the destination programmed and we know where it is.
Yeah. And what that does is it makes your recruitment cheaper because you're bringing in junior people, developing them up. The investment that you do in training pays you off because you're not constantly recruiting. The more senior you are, the higher the recruitment fees are. And I often hear people saying, oh, you know, but if I train them, they'll disappear and they'll go and work somewhere else. So I am not a big fan of Richard Branson because I think he's a bit of a PR junkie. But in his wisdom in this one thing is absolute. And that is, train your people so they can leave. Treat them so they don't want to. And that's including allowing them to see themselves in the future of your business. Because if they don't see themselves, if you can't show them a picture where they are in the future of your business, in the absence of that, they will make the story up. And that story is likely to not include you.
I love that. And it applies to the business too. It's a very similar concept of build the business like you're going to sell it.
Yeah.
And love it like you're not going to sell it.
Absolutely.
Like build the business like you're going to sell it, but love it like you're keeping it. And or behave like it will be yours forever while you're building the item you're going to sell, because if it's a sellable asset, then it's valuable to you too. And if you would buy it, someone else. But having that choice is everything. I couldn't agree more with that quote that Richard Branson said. It's totally true when it comes to team as well. Christine, as we're wrapping up here, could you just let the audience know who's listening how they can get in touch with you or learn more about what it is you do?
Okay, so my website is really simple. It's Christine Nicholson, all one word, .co.uk. And my book, which I'm shamelessly promoting in the background, is Sell It. If you are interested in getting exit ready or understanding what it takes to get exit ready, then go to getexitready, all one word, .co.uk. It's a free 3 to 4 minute quiz. It'll give you a free report with some actions. So you can actually get started implementing something today that will cost you nothing more than a bit of time and a little bit of thinking.
Absolutely love that. And just to be clear, you can work with anyone, anywhere in the world, right?
Absolutely. I have to say, I am a typical Brit in that I don't speak any other languages other than English. Although I have lived in 10 different countries and it's just bizarre. But so I tend to work with English speaking countries. But yeah, I've worked globally.
Yes. So for those in the States listening, you can
Oh,
definitely
yes.
utilize Christine's
Yeah.
services. So definitely check out the website. It will be in the show notes in a link. So click on there to take the quiz and get those action steps. Why not? There's nothing to lose. I'm probably going to go do it myself just to find out what Christine thinks. Christine, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
It's just been a fabulous conversation. So thank you for making it easy.